party of fiscal responsibility. For too long, Britain has not had the economy it deserves. Under this Conservative government, too many people can't live a secure, happy and fulfilling life. Too many businesses face crippling uncertainty over their future. And too many of us feel vulnerable in the face of huge technological change. The fact is, the Conservatives have made our economy weaker, much weaker. People might be in work, but more and more struggle to make ends meet. Businesses have been hit, with investment down significantly since the 2016 referendum. Productivity has been grimly weak, with no growth at all in the last 12 months. The Office of National Statistics confirmed only this week that Britain's economic growth in the last year has been the lowest for a decade. And this government has ignored all our long-term economic problems. We have alarming skills shortages, a persistent trade deficit, and inequality that's both socially and economically damaging. Yet so far, the debate on the economy in this election, on our future, has been a debate about fantasies. Fantasies born of a nostalgia for a British imperial past, competing with fantasies from a failed 1970s ideology. Fantasies competing to bankrupt Britain. Boris Johnson has snuck into Jeremy Corbyn's allotment and stolen his magic money tree. The British people deserve better than fantasy economics. So my job today, as the Liberal Democrat candidate for Chancellor of the Exchequer, is to offer you a better option, our optimistic, practical vision for the future, and to expose the other two fantasies for what they are. And their economic fantasies begin with Brexit. Brexit is not the answer to any of Britain's economic challenges. In fact, Brexit is precisely the wrong answer to all of Britain's economic problems and will make them all worse. A calm, honest analysis of how best to tackle every single economic problem facing Britain today would conclude remaining in the European Union will help, not hinder. Take trade. The world has entered a period of dangerous protectionism. Led by Trump's trade war with China, and with a US presidential election less than a year away, expect this US-China trade war to escalate. Yet in Javid's and Johnson's fantasy Brexit world, it somehow makes sense, in response to this growing global trade protectionism, to ditch Britain's best trade agreement ever with our closest and nearest economic partners, to pull out of the many trade deals the EU has successfully negotiated with the rest of the world. People should be deeply troubled by this madness. It's not global Britain, it's little Britain. And just think about the practicalities and the costs, and making trade with 27 European countries more difficult. The government's own figures show that filling in the customs forms at newly erected border controls will alone cost importers and exporters a massive £15 billion a year in red tape. This will strangle business and cost people their jobs. This is regulation gone mad. This will put back the war on red tape several decades. The conclusion can only be this: the Conservatives are no longer the party of business. They are the party of red tape regulation. And then we come to the fantasy economics of Corbyn and McDonnell, led by renationalisation and state theft of private savings. They say this will somehow boost business investment. It would be laughable if it wasn't so deeply dangerous. And Lexit, Corbyn's Labour Brexit, is at least 4 decades out of date. Before the UK joined the common market, we were the sick man of Europe. Bizarrely, Labour has forgotten that the best way to take back control from global multinationals, especially the tech giants is a European-wide response, with strong competition powers at Europe, which New Labour used to champion. Instead, this Labour Party now dreams of costly new capital controls to defend Fortress Corbyn. Fantasy Island may have been a great TV show, but it's going to be a horror film. Our great country must not become a fantasy island, whether it's the 1870s imperial fantasy of Jacob and Johnson or the 1970s socialist fantasy of Jeremy and John. In rejecting Brexit, in wanting to build a brighter future, not return to a less than rosy past, Liberal Democrats have a detailed plan for a successful, sustainable economy. The first part of our plan is clear and unequivocal. Stop Brexit. Any economic plan that involves Brexit is a weaker plan than ours. According to the respected Institute for Fiscal Studies, Brexit has already cost our national economy over £1 billion a week in lost output. How can the parties of Brexit claim they would have money for our schools when Brexit will be costing the Exchequer billions into the future? How would they afford any rise in public spending when the government's own analysis shows that our economy would be 6.7% poorer in the coming years were Brexit to happen? By contrast, the Liberal Democrat public finance plan is backed by our commitment to stay in the European Union. We calculate that the extra growth from staying in the EU would yield a Remain bonus, a £50 billion Remain bonus for our investment in schools, for our fight against inequality. Now, I am today prepared to accept the criticism by the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies of our Remain bonus. The IFS are probably right when they say that our 50 billion figure is cautious and reasonable. That's yet more evidence that Liberal Democrats are now the only party of sound finance. Just look at the contrast with the other two parties. The spending competition between the Brexit parties, the Labour and Conservative fantasists, has made Santa Claus look like Scrooge. So while the Conservatives may attack Labour on spending, the truth is both the old parties are now fiscally incontinent. The hard economic fact is this: Brexit will hit growth, short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And that means a Labour or Tory Brexit will hit our public finances, our schools, police, NHS, now and into the future. The second part of the Liberal Democrat economic plan focuses on climate change and on our environment. For Brexit is far from the only big challenge of our times. The climate emergency has to be an urgent priority. And our radical climate message is clear. We will decarbonise capitalism. A Liberal Democrat government will jumpstart an economy-wide programme to tackle the climate emergency. And I can announce today that across a 5-year parliament, Liberal Democrats would spend and invest an extra £100 billion of public finance on climate action and environmental protection. Now, I must confess, I get a bit excited about these climate economy plans, partly because I was proud to lead stage 1 of Britain's decarbonisation, when, thanks to Liberal Democrat ministers, Britain's renewable power more than trebled. I've seen what we did in government, and I know what we can do in government again. Liberal Democrats made Britain the world leader in offshore wind power. Liberal Democrats encouraged Siemens to invest in Hull so we could regenerate that city and bring new, well-paid green jobs. And Liberal Democrat climate policies have seen coastal community after coastal community benefit from renewable electricity investment, from Grimsby to Lowestoft. I want to build on that world-beating climate industry record. The Liberal Democrat government would intervene again To create the new industries and new markets, we need to tackle the climate emergency. Our climate investment plan includes a new £10 billion renewable power fund. It alone would leverage in over £100 billion of extra private climate investment. Not a new subsidy, but state climate finance to fast-track clean power deployment and give a healthy profit to the taxpayer. Payback as we clean up. This fund will confirm Britain as the world leader in offshore wind power and make Britain the global #1 in tidal power too. From the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon to a whole suite of tidal power stations around our coast, creating another new climate industry. And we'll invest 15 billion more to make every building in the country greener, with an emergency 10-year programme to save energy, end fuel poverty, and cut heating bills, cutting the average household's energy bill by a whopping £550 a year. In government before, the Liberal Democrats showed that an activist, well-designed climate policy could kickstart a new industry, with subsidies that then got competed away in the green power auctions I legislated for as Secretary of State. And in government again, we will build on our great climate record with floating offshore wind, with tidal power, with carbon capture and storage, and hydrogen technologies. And we will regulate the city for climate. From pension funds to banks, from the debt markets to the stock exchanges, we will act. Mandatory disclosure on fossil fuel investments to expose investors to their climate risks. New laws to require a financial institution or large corporate to publish their multi-year strategy to move to net zero. New accounting standards and laws to write down climate-damaging assets to a zero value by 2045. Under Liberal Democrats, UK can become the global standard of climate capitalism for the world. And our responsible reform capitalism can be the key to the fastest possible decarbonisation. Contrast Lib Dem climate economics with Boris Johnson's backfiring clean taxi boast. Made on the same day that Elon Musk, thanks to Brexit, chose Germany over Britain for massive investment in clean transport. Contrast Lib Dem climate capitalism with Labour's renationalisation of energy, set to cost billions, set to hit private investment, and set to delay action. It's hard to think of a more climate-damaging distraction. So the third part of our Liberal Democrat economic plan, people and opportunity. The most important capital a country has is its human capital, yet we don't even measure it. And when you don't measure something, guess what happens? You undervalue it. So we need economic metrics and economic policies that nurture and develop our country's most precious capital. That's why Joe Swinson has been so right to lead the debate for a different approach to budgeting and planning our financial priorities, where well-being economics matters for budget choices. What does well-being budgeting mean? Well, go check out the early experiments in New Zealand, where investment in mental health services has gone up. And then think what a well-being approach to human capital would mean for investment in education and training. I can confirm today that investment in infants, children, young people and adults, their education, their training, their well-being, this would be the top day-to-day spending priority for the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrat government will invest in our country's human capital by an extra 120 billion in capital and revenue over a 5-year parliament. From childcare to colleges, from primary schools to lifelong learning, this will represent a step change in life chances for all people everywhere in our great country. This is a huge investment, but it is fully costed and will be paid for using the Liberal Democrat Remain bonus and using receipts from our corporation and capital gains tax policies. And when we publish our manifesto costings, this will all be fully set out. For unlike the proponents of fantasy economics, we will publish our manifesto costings. That's what voters deserve and what the business community should expect. This brings me to the fourth part of the Liberal Democrats' economic plan, business. Our country is blessed by tens of thousands of brilliant businesses. It's time we celebrated the contribution business makes to our economy and society, jobs, incomes, prosperity. Yes, we want business to be responsible. When it comes to looking after employees and the environment, we need laws to ensure responsible businesses aren't undercut. But most businesses today are responsible. And that's why my message to British business today is this. Liberal Democrats are now the party of business, and we will be the government of business. And that's not just because we would stop Brexit, the central demand of so many business people up and down the country, but in our economic plan, we want to back business with tax reform, with digital networks, and with strong competition policy. So we will replace the analogue tax of business rates that is hitting our high streets with a commercial landowners levy that will revitalise communities, spur on development, and cut tax for so many struggling high street retailers. We won't just invest new capital into broadband, but we will also intervene to change the regulatory approach. Under us, unlike the Tories, UK PLC won't waste so much money in duplication and triplication of digital infrastructure in richer urban areas, whilst leaving untouched poorer communities and rural areas. And unlike Labour, we won't put Big Brother in charge of your digital broadband. Lib Dems won't waste your taxes and scare off private investment with a nonsense return back to state-owned telecoms, where long delays and low quality were the order of the day. Our approach to 5G and beyond isn't just as ambitious as the other parties, it's also far more practical and cost-effective than our political competitors. And our competition policy will be tougher and stronger too. As the Minister for Competition for 2 years, I established the policy which saw the last major reform of Britain's competition law and authorities. But in government, I must confess, I didn't get my way on everything. David Cameron stopped me reforming antitrust law. I wanted to change our system so it became more akin to that of the US and to that of Germany, where businesses and executives who conspire, who form cartels, end up in court. It's called the prosecutorial model. And the main beneficiaries from this approach, smaller firms, entrepreneurs, innovators, businesses who currently lose out so much because the big corporates exploit their market power. And for business, beyond tax, digital and competition, we will renew and embolden a new industrial strategy linked to our regional prosperity strategy. Lib Dems will say to business loud and clear, if you invest in the UK's nations, regions and communities that have been left behind, if you create the jobs we need and treat your employees and the environment responsibility, we will get behind you. So we will regionalise the British Business Bank that Vince Cable set up, so it backs enterprise in the places where it's needed the most in the regions. We will reboot the Regional Growth Fund that Vince Cable also developed so successfully as business minister. And we will rebalance our economy, not least with a low-carbon energy and transport revolution focused on the North and the Midlands. So, to part 5 of our economic plan, infrastructure. Liberal Democrats will invest big in infrastructure. Later in this campaign, we will publish full details of our infrastructure plans for transport, for energy, for digital, for housing, for the regions. But here in Leeds today, I can announce we will invest in plans for a public transport revolution across this great northern city. Leeds is the largest city in Western Europe without a mass transit network. Under Liberal Democrats, we will build one. And I can also tell you that on top of our climate change, environment and transport capital spending, we will invest 45 billion of capital in community development, taking our total infrastructure portfolio to 130 billion over a 5-year parliament. That includes an extra 7 billion for schools and college buildings, both to repair them from the terrible neglect of the Conservatives and to build new ones too. Plus, we have allocated an extra 10 billion for investment in hospitals to ensure our NHS can provide the best care possible. And let me put that investment in context. This will be a level of infrastructure investment not seen in many, many years. And compared to Conservative plans, it will be an additional annual average of 6 billion. But here's the challenge. For any party's infrastructure investment plans, can they be delivered? Because to deliver them, you need the people. You need the skills. You need the plans, the permissions, and the projects. We believe only our infrastructure plans are truly deliverable for 2 reasons. First, our plan is backloaded, meaning we would ramp up over the 5 years. Second, under the Liberal Democrat government, we will be in the European Union, able to enjoy the benefits of freedom of movement, ensuring we have access to skills that are in short supply in the UK, able to enjoy the cost benefits of cost-effective, frictionless trade, able to access cash from the European Investment Bank. But let's focus on the people you need for these infrastructure projects. Everyone knows our economy benefits from free movement of labour. But that's doubly so when it comes to the construction industry. Across the UK, big infrastructure projects have depended on skilled European workers working side by side with skilled British workers. Take free movement of labour away, depreciate the pound even more with Brexit, so you make the UK a less attractive place to come to work, and our construction industry gets hit big time. And that's one reason why the Conservative and Labour infrastructure plans just don't add up. Unless there are significant numbers of European workers involved, it is once again pure fantasy to believe the Conservatives could spend the £100 billion programme they promise, let alone Labour's £400 billion illusion. Which brings me to the final point in the Lib Dem economic plan, our fiscal rules. To be the party of fiscal responsibility, whilst making significant investments in the climate, in schools and in our NHS, it's not enough to produce a cost of manifesto, which we will. You have to restore credibility to the United Kingdom's fiscal rules. Over the last 3 decades, I should say, the one common feature of the fiscal rules set by UK chancellors is this: they've all been broken. We've desperately needed a deeper, more intelligent review of fiscal rules, and this has just been done brilliantly by the Resolution Foundation. They have put forward new analysis and new ideas for a fresh set of fiscal rules. Liberal Democrats have embraced their thinking. And arguably, their most relevant fiscal rule for this election's economy debate is the rule about current spending. How you ensure that your day-to-day spending on things like salaries and benefits is covered by your revenue, primary tax receipts. The Resolution Foundation have proposed a new fiscal rule for day-to-day spending. The government should target a structural surplus in current spending equal to 1% of national income over a parliament. And their rule retains sensible flexibility, allowing spending up to -1% of national income if there's a downturn and forecasts turn out to be wide of the mark. Liberal Democrats will adopt that fiscal rule, and our spending plans meet it. with current account surpluses in every year of our 5-year costings. We embrace fiscal responsibility. The others opt for fiscal risk. Conservatives are targeting only to balance the current account and then in 3 years. Plus, their target has no flexibility at all. And given Brexit will blow this new Tory fiscal rule away in months, that's totally reckless. So if Boris Johnson so much as promises a tax cut, you know you can't trust him. And Labour, well, they are promising to get to current account balance in 5 years' time. Or in plain language, Labour's on the never, never. You may not be aware, but there was supposed to be a debate this Sunday, a Chancellor's debate, when the two fantasists could have competed with a realist. But it looks like Sajid Javid is running scared of debating the economy with me, as he refused to take part in that Chancellor's debate. So today I have two challenges for Sajid Javid. First, stop running from reality and let the voters decide which is more credible, the fantasy economics of Brexit or the brighter future on offer by the Liberal Democrats. Come and debate me, Sajid. Second, agree to have all our election spending pledges, indeed our whole manifestos, independently audited by the Office for Budget Responsibility. We're prepared to do that. Is Sajid Javid, is John McDonnell. And it's clear the Conservatives aren't keen on this. By pulling the budget on the 6th of November, the Conservatives acted to prevent the nation's fiscal watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, from providing the voters with up-to-date facts and independent economic and fiscal projections. So this is the new political economy. Liberal Democrats as the party of fiscal rectitude versus the Tories and Labour as the parties of fiscal incontinence. Facts versus fantasy. So we will continue to set out the Liberal Democrat fact-based priorities for the vision for our economy. Priority 1, stop Brexit. Ensure access to the single market and the customs union and stay cushioned from the American-Chinese trade wars. Invest the $50 billion Remain bonus in schools and tackling inequality. Priority 2, the planet. Decarbonising capitalism and investing $100 billion in low-carbon infrastructure and the environment. Priority 3, people. Transforming our skills, well-being and life chances as never before. Priority 4, business. Responsible businesses that are supported with tax reforms and super-fast broadband, as well as an industrial and regional strategy that reaches countrywide. And priority 5, investment in infrastructure not seen in far too long. So the bottom line is this. If you really want credible, sensible, sustainable public spending plans, vote for a party that won't damage our economy with Brexit. Vote for a party that won't hike up borrowing just to pay for ideology and Brexit. Vote for a party that won't waste billions preparing for leaving the EU and £33 billion just on divorce costs. If you want a greener, fairer, brighter future, vote Liberal Democrat. Okay, so I'm going to open this up now. Thank you to the press, first of all, to answer any questions. So members of the press, a few of you are here. Who wants to go first?
Tom Simons, BBC. You've announced a large amount of new spending here today. Will we at some point in the future need another period of austerity, which the Liberal Democrats have some experience of, to pay for it all? Or was the period of austerity that we experienced under a coalition government not needed at the time?
You're going to have Brexit austerity under Labour and the Conservatives. Brexit threatens austerity, and it threatens austerity like we've never seen before. communities up and down our country are only just recovering from the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, which brought on the cuts that Alistair Darling was going to propose and that then were taken forward by the coalition. So now at this moment, when we should be investing, there are two economic plans by Labour and the Tories that would stop that. And so the Liberal Democrat proposal is to end austerity by staying in the European Union and making these sensible, affordable spending programmes. Back there. Oh, you go first, go on.
Okay, Christian Johnson from Leeds Live. You said you're committed to building a mass transit system here in Leeds. We've tried for 30 years, that's never happened. What makes you so sure that you can do that?
Well, we're going to back it. And I know that it's a very live discussion here in the city. I know that a number of combined local authorities are wanting to see it happen, and obviously Leeds City Council, I'm sure, wants it to happen. But now the debate is getting stronger, the details are getting clearer. I think it's going to need a national government to come behind it. Clearly, with more powers devolved, we want more powers devolved. Liberal Democrats have always argued for that. And budgets devolved as well, particularly on things like infrastructure, most notably transport. But beyond that, I think it's important that a new government says to a great city like Leeds that the time has come to realise that dream. And it is quite outrageous that Leeds is the largest city in the whole of Western Europe without a mass transit system. We have to put that right. The Liberal Democrats are saying we will put that right.
If you are going to build that here, how are you going to ensure that it fits in with your green policy? We have the most polluted street outside of London in the city, so how is that going to fit in with that?
Well, if we can have much better public transport, we can help people travel around without using their cars, without using the vans. And that will take polluting vehicles off the street. My home city is actually Nottingham. And you may know they've had a tram system there for a little while now, and that's improved the air pollution in the city of Nottingham. Most people believe that if you have clean public transport, it's probably one of the best ways, the most sustainable ways of dealing with air pollution as well as global air pollution with climate change. So I think it will be a real step forward for the city. Now, I'm not saying I'm an expert on Leeds. I don't know where the worst spots are for air pollution. But if it's anything like London, even my constituency in one of the suburbs, we have streets, we have roads where the air pollution breaks all the health limits. We have got to act. And not just because of climate change, but because of what air pollution is doing to people's health. It is hugely damaging. And if you want to invest, not just in the environment, but in people's health, things like a mass transit system in a city like Leeds make perfect sense.
Hi, William James from Reuters. You set out the case for fiscal rectitude, balanced budget. In 2010 and 2015, that was the kind of argument that the voters were prepared to listen to because they could see the financial crisis. Do you think it's the type of argument that voters want to listen to now? And if not, how do you convince them that it's what they need to listen to?
Well, let's be clear. You can still meet fiscal rules and be economically responsible and make important environmental and social and economic investments. You just have to be honest about where the money is coming from. So on the revenue side, we've talked about a Remain bonus, but we've also talked about modest tax rises. Now, one of the problems that Conservatives face is they will never talk about tax rises. Of course, they do them after the election. We've seen that time and time again from the Conservatives, but they won't be honest with you. And I can't think of a person least likely to be honest with you than Boris Johnson. So when we publish our manifesto, you will see significant revenues from the Remain bonus, from our tax rises, from spending, savings we're making elsewhere, which will pay for a significant boost, particularly in investment in infants, children, young people and adults. On the capital side, I didn't go into details in the other fiscal rules because my speech was already too long. I was just taking pity on you. But there's another fiscal rule from the Resolution Foundation we want to adopt. It's a much better fiscal rule for thinking about capital investment, which the country is going to need anyway to make up the neglect of the past, but particularly to prepare ourselves for a low-carbon future. And this new idea is about using the whole government balance sheet. And only for the last 2 years have we had data being produced by the Office for National Statistics to show what the public sector's balance sheet is, with the pension liabilities, with the assets we hold, and so on and so forth. This actually gives a much better indication if investments are high quality and add to the net worth of our country. And so the fiscal rule is, over the Parliament, you must make the net worth of the public sector increase. You must improve it. Now, that will mean that there'll need to be independent tests of major public investment decisions. We would consider using the OBR again, or possibly the National Infrastructure Commission, to making sure that the best infrastructure projects like the mass transit system here in Leeds were the ones that really went through, because they would provide the returns. So when you have fiscal rules, don't necessarily stop you making sensible decisions, but if you've got good fiscal rules, they help you think more intelligently. So when we've had debt to GDP ratio rules, they've only been one side of the balance sheet. If you're going to make sensible decisions about investments, you need to have the liabilities and the assets. You need to have the debt costs and the income that's being generated, say from council houses. Unless you have that full picture, you can't make sensible decisions. What I'm proposing, what the Resolution Foundation are proposing, is something that most businesses do naturally. But UK PLC has not done it. Surely it's a more businesslike, more responsible approach to follow that tried and tested route. Now we have the figures, and that's what Liberal Democrats would do. And our capital spending, and it is ambitious, £130 billion over 5 years, that would easily, with the capital investment we're making, ensure that the net value of the public sector improved during that Parliament.
Given how much remaining in the EU will save us as a country, according to you and the IFS, given what you would like to do with that money and the plans you have laid out, isn't it very difficult then to say that if the only way you have of stopping Brexit and all the damage that will do is by working with Jeremy Corbyn for a second referendum, and you are going to rule that out, aren't you therefore consigning the country in that scenario to an economic disaster?
What we've said is we will not support either a Boris Johnson or a Jeremy Corbyn premiership. We're not going to vote for them to be the Prime Minister. But if either of them form a minority government, as is possible, we will vote issue by issue. We will vote where we agree with the government, and where we disagree, we'll vote against. And that will force any government to come to the centre to be more moderate. And whether it's stopping the Conservatives going ahead with Brexit, or stopping the Conservatives deregulating our economy so we become like Singapore on Thames, we will stop Johnson doing that. And equally with Jeremy Corbyn, if he puts things on the table we like, of course we'll vote for those. But if he puts on the table things we don't like, we'll vote against them. But what we will not do is form a coalition or have a supply and confidence relationship, because we think these parties have become too extreme, and both of them basically support Brexit. And we don't trust Jeremy Corbyn on Brexit, and we certainly don't trust Boris Johnson.
Just to come back on that. You wouldn't have a supply and confidence arrangement, you wouldn't have a coalition with those parties, or with those parties as led by Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, just to be clear.
Yes, although let me also be clear.
No, I'm just asking which it is.
Well, I'm going to answer you. Fundamentally, it's about policy, not personalities. It just so happens that these personalities in Corbyn and Boris have taken both their parties to the extremes. I mean, I don't think it's contestable that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have taken the Labour Party to the hard left. And I don't think it's contestable that Boris Johnson isn't the most right-wing Conservative leader we have probably ever seen. And that's why Nigel Farage backs him after all. And it's extremely difficult for a party of progress and reform, like the Liberal Democrats, to back these parties who've gone to the extreme. And I don't think the British people would want us to. And by taking the approach that Joe Swinson has outlined that I'm confirming today, it will force people to think about what's actually in the national interest, not the party's interest. Now, I hope and believe we can be the largest party in the next parliament. When people look at us over the next few weeks, I think the polls will shift in our direction. But if they don't, but we have, as I very much expect, a large number of Liberal Democrat MPs, we will use that power in the nation's interest, which is in sharp contrast to the way the divided other parties have gone about the whole Brexit debate.
Hi, Laura Butler from Sky News. I didn't hear any mention about citizen engagement when it came to your ways to tackle the environment and climate emergency, as you put it. People say unless you have citizen engagement, you won't get any real change. What citizen engagement have you had?
Oh, well, I'm apologies for that omission. I think it's a fair point you make. Liberal Democrats very much believe in completely upgrading the way that governments, be they national or local, engage with citizens. And what's been exciting in the climate emergency debate is how people want to engage. And so, be it citizen juries or citizen assemblies or other methods, I think that is absolutely one of the way forwards. I'd actually like, not just on the climate change debate, but more broadly in policy at local and national level, to experiment with some of the participatory democracy ideas that are around the world. You may not have followed the mayor of Calgary when he said, I want to do 3 things for Calgary. What 3 things do you want to do for Calgary? Tell me and I'll help you. Or the program in Iceland called Better Reykjavik, where citizens got involved on an online platform, were able to put forward ideas to improve their communities, and those that were voted up on the online platform actually got implemented. This is a way to involve people far more. Liberal Democrats, if we have been anything, particularly at local government level, we've been a party that wants to involve citizens. And with it coming back to the climate change, given that climate action is going to involve quite significant changes in people's lifestyles, it is absolutely essential that we engage people in that debate and how they best would like to shape that in their lives.
Have you done any of that prior to making your announcements and your decisions about the £50 million, for example, for greenhouse?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's rocket science to think that people know that we need more renewable power and they want to get rid of coal and gas, and you've got to have something. And while there may be a few people who prefer nuclear, if you look at all the opinion polls, they come in time and time again. They were always, when I was Secretary of State, preferring renewable power. So I mean, that's like one form of citizen engagement, but it certainly backs what we are saying. And there's a huge movement about fuel poverty. And in our plans for insulating people's homes, we're going to target fuel-poor homes first. That means to me both socially and economically sensible. But to take to your point, to the further point, we would want a lot of this money to be spent at local level, where local communities, local cities, local villages, local towns could engage with their residents about how they would like to spend that money to make their communities greener and more climate friendly. Absolutely.
Labour's policies of taking the railways and utilities back into public ownership are said to be very popular. If a Corbyn-led government were to go ahead with these policies, would we vote for them?
Well, the key thing was in your assumption about said to be popular. When people are presented with the facts about their proposed nationalisations, that it would cost a lot of money, that it would get in the way of other action that's urgent, they tend to not like them. And particularly when they're shown that there are alternatives. I don't think the privatised utilities are perfect, far, far from it. But my experience as Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, when I was dealing with the privatised energy utilities, that if you took firm action with regulation, if you designed policies to move the energy system to a greener, renewable approach, you could do that. You didn't need to nationalise it. And I couldn't think of a bigger waste of money, a bigger waste of time than doing that. Well, I can see there's a difference. The key thing, though, I would say, which is, I think, meeting you halfway, is to have more democratic control, which you do through a proper, tough regulatory system. So I think that is a quicker, more cost-effective way of meeting the reasonable social and environmental needs of our population.
So you said that you're the party of fact versus fiction, and your third point focuses on people, particularly young people. Do you think that you can have their support after you went back on your tuition?
Well, I'd say two things. One of the things we did when we were in government, when we were taking those difficult decisions, is we ensured we had protection for people from low-income backgrounds. And how did we do that? We ensured that student maintenance grants were kept and increased. And that package saw more people from lower-income backgrounds going to university. What then happened, when the Conservatives were governing by themselves, they abolished maintenance grants. And guess what happened then? So in our manifesto, we have fully funded the restoration of student maintenance grants. And I'm very proud, and I thought it would be very attractive to students. But I'll tell you the other thing that students tell me in my area, we have a university in Kingston. They want to know, where do you stand on Brexit? Because the vast majority of students want Britain to stay in the European Union. They don't want their freedoms taken away. That's what the Labour and the Conservative Party want to do to young people, take away their freedoms. Well, we're not going to stand for it. And the other thing that young people say to me that they really care about is climate change. And when they see a party that did what it said in government, stood up to the Tories who wanted to try to stop us, but have made Britain one of the powerhouses for renewable energy, we've got a track record to be proud of, and we've got a policy agenda which is really radical. You point to me another party that wants to decarbonise capitalism in the profound way that we do.
But the students at the moment are ones that can afford it.
So I don't...
So the students that you're speaking to are students who have been able to go to university with the £10,000 fee a year, which it currently is, and you said wouldn't happen in the last government.
Well, all I'm saying is what we did was we protected those from low-income backgrounds. I don't know what you would do. I mean, some people and some of the ideas that came out in the Labour Party under Ed Miliband would have basically helped richer students. That's not what Liberal Democrats want to do. We want to make sure that those students from low-income backgrounds, where, for example, no one from that family has been to university, get to university. That is supporting social mobility. It follows through from all of our plans. So, for example, the pupil premium that we were able to invest in our schools to make sure the most disadvantaged children had more money spent on them and more time given to them. I was hugely proud of that. The most radical, progressive education policy in schools, helping young people since the Second World War. We have a proud track record of social mobility, whether it's at HE or FE or at schools.
Here was talking about this community engagement from students. I'm a civil environmental student myself.
Oh, great.
And my biggest worry at the moment is that if you put in regulations that come with the construction industry, there are lovely green options, like Arab develops so many great green buildings, zero carbon buildings, but the developers who actually issue the buildings don't actually want them. And how are you going to force these developers to build flood-safe buildings, to build carbon-neutral buildings, and not contribute to the environment?
Well, I can give you some stories from facts in government. Let me start with the zero carbon homes regulation, which was a Liberal Democrat proposal in the coalition. We put it into law. The only problem was 3 months after we left office, the Tories got rid of it. But when we were consulting on that regulation, we found that a lot of people in the construction industry supported it. There's something called the Green Building Coalition. They represent many house builders, many parts of the construction industry, and they supported a zero carbon homes regulation. And I'm afraid it was lobbying by one or two of the very big builders. I won't mention any names because I can't necessarily prove it, but I can imagine we might be able to guess who they might be. And they lobbied Mr. Pickles and they lobbied Mr. Osborne, and they got rid of that regulation. It's simply not true that industry won't rise to this challenge. Many parts of industry want to rise to this challenge. I can give you another regulation example, but let me take a few more questions. Just to say that in government, we did the right thing, taking business with us, and it's the Tories, old-fashioned Tories, who won't do it. I'll give you, I'm in Yorkshire. I won't do a Yorkshire accent because that would be silly. But there was a Conservative minister called Eric Pickles, you may have heard of him. I was having a battle with him over regulation in the private renter sector. I wanted to make it illegal for landlords to rent out their properties if they hadn't met minimum energy efficiency requirements. We eventually got that regulation through. But during that process, Mr. Pickles said to me, regulations are communist. I said to Mr. Pickles, thou shalt not kill is a regulation. And it came in before Karl Marx. There are ideologues in both the right-wing Conservative Party and now the hard-left Labour Party. And we stand to reject that. We stand for practical, sensible policies that will deliver on climate change, that will deliver on social justice. And I think the more people hear that voice from Liberal Democrats, the more likely we are to be the largest party.
I think in the north of England, we see there's a possible 100 billion white elephant here called HS2. You're talking about mass transit around Leeds. Can we not expand that to transit through the north of England? Yeah.
Oh.
This corridor, Liverpool through to Hull, which is appallingly slow.
A
fraction of that 100 billion would help solve that.
Well, I wouldn't want to get ahead of myself because we may have more announcements. Well, no, maybe we'll have more announcements. We have members of the press here, so I'm not going to pre-announce something, but what you say is very interesting.
Mark Carney made an interesting statement at the last Treasury Select Committee. I actually found it quite shocking. And it kind of went over the heads of the committee, Steve Baker, and it was barely reported in the press either. And the comment was that the market has priced in a temperature increase over pre-industrial levels of 4 degrees C, north of 4 degrees C. And that is what the market is saying. So the valuations of companies, valuations of loans, valuations of investments result in, if you put those together, you come up with 4 degrees C temperature change. So, for example, the share price of BP, which is a view of future profitability, that assumes we're not going to transition off fossil fuels anytime soon. So that is the view of the market. The largest pension fund in the world, the Japan Pension Fund, is also, their view is 3.7, but that's based on they are deliberately trying to lower it with their investments. That's based solely on their investments. So I can see that your proposal of by 2045 writing down fossil fuel assets to zero would impact that. My question, I have two questions that are related. One is, has your plan looked at the transition risks to that? Is 2045 the right time to go, etc.? And if you're going to have that impact, surely you need international cooperation to do it. One country can't do it on its own.
Well, I thank you very much for that question. Let me let you into a little secret. Mark Carney is one of my heroes. The appointment of Mark Carney to be the Governor of the Bank of England was the best decision that George Osborne ever made. Because in Mark Carney, we've had a Governor of the Bank of England who gets climate change and has done more work than probably any public official in this country to think through how we need to transform capitalism so we can be climate ready. I had one-to-one meeting with Mr. Carney because the leadership he was showing, I wanted to ask him how politicians could help and the next stage that politicians could do to take forward his analysis. And the first thing you asked was about the accounting rule. Let's be clear, what I'm saying is that when a company or a financial institution is valued with its balance sheet at the moment, the valuation applied to any fossil fuel assets that might still not be exploited by 2045 will be written down to zero. Now, ahead of time. That would affect market valuations now and have a very big signal about future investment and exploration. That's a really big statement. It might sound technical and a bit nerdy. It's really important. Then you asked, really importantly, about the transition and the transition risks. And just to explain a little bit more clearly, one of the concerns is that we're living in an age of what's called the carbon bubble, where people have overinvested in oil and gas and coal, which can never, ever be used if we're going to be under 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees from the Paris Climate Treaty. And therefore, our pensions, many people's investments are seriously at risk because they can never come to fruition if we're going to tackle climate change. And managing that bubble is actually one of the biggest economic financial challenges of our age. And no one talks about it. And what we've first got to do is stop that inflating more. And then we've got to try to deflate that carbon bubble over time. And it will require the wisdom of Solomon. But if we don't start now, taking some of the decisions I'm talking about, ideas I'm talking about, that others are talking about too, we will never get there. That carbon bubble could blow up in our face and never get properly deflated so we can tackle climate change. And the prize is this. If we can manage that transition with that financial instability and get that right, we can move investments out of actually relatively low-performing fossil fuel investments into a higher performing clean fuel investments. We can protect our pensioners and we can bring back stability and tackle climate change. And we can see a huge switch of literally trillions of dollars, yen, rubles, pounds, euros, out of fossil fuels into green technologies. There's a huge prize here, but we need politicians to think about it clearly. And I see no thinking in the Labour Party, no thinking in the Green Party, and even less in the Conservative Party. And that's why I think it is this party that needs to be in the Treasury, in government, to tackle the huge crisis of the climate emergency. I'm being told I've got to go now. So can I thank you all for coming? Thank you for your questions. And to the press in the room, I'm very delighted you're here, giving Liberal Democrats the coverage that we deserve, and you're going to increase your coverage as the election goes through. That's very kind of you to agree to do that. And to Liberal Democrat members, I hope you're enjoying your canvassing, and hopefully you're going to win in at least one seat. And one person I can see in the audience, I'm looking forward for him to joining me on the green benches. Thank you.